Hello and welcome back to Shock's Talks. I'm Shakti. This is my third time trying to record this episode, so let's see if the third time is the charm. It is Friday the 13th, and this is episode lucky number 13, so we're going to get a little spooky today. On this channel, I'm discussing UFOs, UAP, aliens, paranormal happenings, and the mysterious nature of reality and consciousness. And today we're going to dig into the consciousness side again. So we're going to get into a theory called the love bite, and this has to do with interference by non-physical entities into human love relationships. This type of thing can be viewed as intervening gods, angels, demons, or other types of spirits or non-physical entities. And these types of things have been talked about in many spiritual traditions and mythology throughout history, but today's focus is around a very specific theory that relates to a possible ET connection to all of this. And it's some weird stuff. It's the fringe of the fringe, but we're just going to take a look at it, you know? We're looking at all the things and considering them when it comes to this paranormal stuff. So before we get into that, here's a little recap of a show that I just found on Netflix. It just came out. It's called Encounters, and it's 4 episodes about UFO sightings around the world, and it was pretty interesting. So they covered a lot of what we've already looked at together on this channel and a few other sightings as well. They talked about Stephenville, Texas, 2008, multiple sightings and reports of beings. There were a variety of UFOs seen. There was a flying saucer-like craft that was smooth and silvery, and there was an orange orb that they mentioned, and then the small bluish white orbs kind of bubbling or popping in and out of the sky. And there was a being that each one of these episodes covered both UFOs and sightings of beings, which was a pretty interesting take for a show like this. So in this episode, they talked about a mantis being that this man saw through his rifle scope when a UFO came over him in the forest, and he looked up to see if he could get a closer look. He saw this mantis being. And this man also shot at the UFO, but then it disappeared and nothing happened to him. So he was safe and everything was fine. But in my mind, I'm kind of thinking, like, let's not open fire at things we don't understand. But that's just me. So anyway, there was an episode on the mass school sighting in Zimbabwe from 1994. And this is something that I talked about in episode 7 of Shock's Talks. And this sighting happened at the Ariel School and had over 60 witnesses. They were children. And some of these children had telepathic communication with the alien beings who came out of the craft. And it's very interesting to hear these kids talk about it. There's video footage from interviews that happened back in the 90s around this, and they also share some current day interviews with these adults now. And most of them, I think, are still around. So you get to hear a variety of perspectives on this. And there was a new piece of information here for me, which was from the headmistress, who I had never heard from before in any of the previous interviews or videos about this sighting. And I think she just came out with this recently, but she kind of admitted to having her own abduction experience around the time of the sighting, shortly after, and she didn't talk about it at the time. And then she had multiple visits from this group of aliens for a little while after that. And I think it was pretty jarring for her, and she went into a depression for a while and was really just thinking she didn't even want to be alive anymore because it was just all too much to handle. And at that point in time, the aliens actually invited her to go with them, and she declined and stayed here on Earth, and she's okay, and they never came back, and that was that. So that's very interesting too. And then There was an episode that covered a big sighting in England around 1977. This one reminded me a lot of the Belgian wave that we talked about in earlier episodes here. And this was one of those situations where so many different people in a small area over a number of days and weeks reported all kinds of different craft. They saw beings also. Um, there were 450 reports overall at this time, and this was all happening near one of the military bases as well. And it was coastal, and there was a report of one of the UFOs flying into a small cluster of islands called Stack Rocks, just like a little rocky island right off the coast. And they also mentioned that this area had a history of fairy lore. So some people were speculating that maybe these aliens have been around here for a long time and they were mischievous and they kind of showed up here and there throughout time, and people called them fairies, but maybe they were aliens. And this is the kind of thinking that comes up a lot around this topic because there's a lot of folklore that suggests that people might have been having sightings similar to what we call UFO sightings today throughout time, and just had different ways of calling them or labeling them based on their level of understanding and where their heads were at those times. And then they talked a little bit about UFOs' connection to the ocean and the probability that UFOs have bases in our oceans. And this theory comes from a lot of data around UFOs going into the ocean, being found under the ocean. Submarines have gone down and found craft. And I know that Richard Dolan is working on a book right now about this very topic, and I'm really excited for that when it comes out because he does a lot of research and he gathers a lot of data, and I'm sure he's going to have some really interesting things to say about underwater UFOs and the connection between UFOs and our oceans here. On this show, they did mention that it would be a very likely place to make a base because of the stability of water. And what they were saying is that, water exists in the state that it is only within a very specific range of temperatures. So no matter what planet you were on, if there was water and you knew how to interact with that water, you could set up a base there because the water is going to be somewhat similar in that sense. So I thought that was really interesting. And kind of surprising that they included that in this show. And then the final episode was about Japan, and this focused a lot on the cultural differences in how we Westerners view and react to this phenomena and the Japanese culture. And they were kind of suggesting that a lot of people just accept these things as something unexplainable and that they're fine with that and they don't need to know. They just take it for what it is. And they talked about UFO sightings that happened in 2011 during the Fukushima power plant meltdown. They considered the possibility that some of these UFOs were there to help mitigate the disaster and that they were balancing the energy, the radiation, and that they were helpful. And they go into some ancient legends and documents that suggest that maybe UFOs had been visiting Japan since 1803. So check out this little series if you're in the mood, and you can see some video footage of UFOs in these episodes, interviews with all kinds of different people from all around the world. And I thought it was a pretty well-rounded little series, and they covered a lot of territory for just 4 episodes. And it's also just interesting that this topic is still a hot topic right now, and a lot of information continues to roll out, and more people are wanting to know what's up with all this stuff. So that's pretty cool. They also ended it on a very positive note. They left us on the episode that contained opinions of people who believe that the UFOs are definitely here to help and aliens are always watching us and are allies to humanity. And they were saying that these aliens are here to help us restore balance. So it's interesting, we've talked about this before, but there's a whole range of theories about what's going on and all kinds of people thinking all kinds of things about this, but it's always fascinating to come across those people who feel very confident that this is all for good. And I love it. I want that to be the truth, but I remain skeptical. And today we're going to get into a topic that's a little less optimistic. So, yeah, it is what it is. In other related media news, there was a recent episode of Weaponized that covered remote viewing and why this is an important piece of the UFO puzzle. My first episode on remote viewing was episode 5 of Shocks Talks, and it's something that we'll keep coming back to because it's definitely an important link between consciousness phenomena and this topic of UFOs. I also just learned about another podcast that I started listening to a little bit, and that is the UFO Rabbit Hole podcast. So I've only listened to like 1 or 2 episodes, is what I was trying to say there. And this is something that a friend recommended to me. It's sounding like it's going to be a good one. The host is Kelly Chase, and there are interviews as well as just her kind of exploring theories and piecing together the information in a really intelligent way. So I love also having another woman's voice in this realm. And there are a few of them out there. As always, the links are below. So let's get into our topic for today, Eve Lorgen and the alien love bite. Last time, we talked a little bit about some theories that focus on hybridization and the physical abduction phenomena, genetic programs that span generations, and alien-human hybrids that are being raised on board alien craft. And we talked about David Jacobs in relationship to all this. And he was working with abductees using hypnotic regression to gather information and piece together his theories. This time, we're going to look at another side, the energetic or psychological manipulation and interference in human relationships. Now, this stuff can seem totally weird to some and probably not that wild to others who are already down a few of these rabbit holes. So, as always, this is just information, and I'm certainly not interested in convincing you of anything. I'm just presenting some theories, and this love bite theory comes from psychologist Eve Lorgen, and it's about this non-human interference. Her work is with all kinds of people suffering from anomalous traumas, and a lot of what happens in these so-called love bite arrangements affects the feelings, thoughts, and energies of the abductees and can really derail their lives. The effects are extreme and the experiences quite bizarre. So, one way I think of it is if there is a reconnaissance aspect to what is going on with aliens visiting Earth, perhaps it's not too crazy to imagine that these intelligences could be interested in the psychology and motivations of humans. And I'm pausing on this for a second just to say that we mentioned behavioral psychology in the last episode, and I was thinking about it in terms of like the patterns, analyzing the patterns of these interactions. But the government is thinking about the behavioral psychology of the UFOs, and certain people are trying to understand the motivations of these UFOs based on their actions towards humans. And it's funny to me because it's like they're really separating out the fact that there's just an intelligence behind these things. And to me, it's kind of one and the same. But what they're looking at is the way that these UFOs seem to present themselves. They're not openly aggressive. Maybe they're gathering data on us through these interactions. Some people say that they are not just crashing, but they're actually landing craft and abandoning it They're basically gifting certain pieces of technology to us to see what we'll do with it or to help us figure out something about them. So there's all kinds of things going on, and people are trying to analyze the behavior basically. This side of it that looks at the experiences of abductees is about trying to analyze the reported behavior of the beings who are interacting with these abductees. So, love and romantic relationships are an especially potent human interaction, both chemically and emotionally. So, perhaps there is some study happening around this aspect of our humanity. And perhaps love bite arrangements are a method used to gather information about one way in which we can be manipulated or controlled. Studying and interfering with our love connections could also be a part of genetic hybrid programs or even something else altogether. There are many theories in the fringes about entities that some call energy vampires. These could be human or non-human beings who drain energy or feed on negative emotions. And this isn't normally associated with UFOs or the idea of aliens, but in a few cases it is. Also, if you need a good laugh, please go and watch What We Do in the Shadows and learn about energy vampires from Colin Robinson. They also portray emotional vampires on that show, and I think it's hilarious. And I love to bring up Colin Robinson when I am thinking about people that make me feel drained in life, because it happens. Anyway, back to the theories. I've never been into David Icke personally, but I have heard a little bit about him over the years, and this is a snippet from Wikipedia about his theories, and this relates to what we're talking about today. Icke contends that the universe consists of vibrational energy and infinite dimensions sharing the same space. He claims that there is an interdimensional race of reptilian beings, the Archons or Anunnaki, which have hijacked the Earth. Further, a genetically modified human Archon hybrid race of reptilian shapeshifters manipulates events to keep humans in fear so that the Archons can feed off the resulting negative energy. So this sounds a lot like the idea of an energy vampire in a way, like manipulating events to keep people in fear in order to feed off the negative energy. This is one person's theory on something that feeds off of fear, and to me, a theory like this is fear-based itself, and it's also fear-inducing, so it just doesn't sit right with me. That's why I haven't really dug into his work too much, but there could be something there. Another person who came to their own conclusion about entities feeding on fear was Robert Monroe. Now, in case you don't know who he is, we have talked about him before, but he's the man responsible for many books on out-of-body travel, and he created the Monroe Institute, which is still up and running. And this is a place where a lot of famous remote viewers have ties and have trained, and people continue to go for retreats and different learning programs, but it is especially focused on developing the skills of remote viewing and out-of-body or astral travel. And this is also the same Robert Monroe that Tom Campbell studied with. He went there, Tom Campbell went to Monroe in the 70s, I believe, and he worked with him for 30 years with Dennis Menerick, doing experiments and learning about this phenomena and trying to sort of prove or disprove it from a scientific perspective. They were young scientists, and by the end of it, they came out kind of pretty spiritual because what they learned just led them to a whole new understanding of reality. So Tom, after his 30 years of working with Robert Monroe, developed his theory of everything, and his book is called My Big Toe. And I talk about him a lot because I think his theory makes a lot of sense, and his outlook is very spiritually positive overall, because he basically just has concluded that like it's all okay, everything is for our learning and growth, and we're just here to evolve towards love. And I think that makes a lot of sense to me. So I like Tom Campbell. And back to Monroe and his sort of energy vampire theory, he had some experiences out of body where he observed that humans and animals were giving off this sort of energy that he called loosh, which I think is kind of funny and a really funny name, but it's Loosh. And this loosh was something that he started to believe was being farmed in a way, and that Earth was some kind of loosh farm where some other entities were harvesting this energy, and that a lot of the loosh was coming off of like negative emotional experiences. So again, similar to David Icke, and it relates to Eve Lorgen's theory. So it's interesting that multiple people have observed a certain dynamic and tried to make sense of it, and there are others too who have similar ideas to these. It's really impossible to prove, but many people have observed or experienced things that lead them to these thoughts. And I think of them as metaphors for things we can't yet explain. So maybe there is a true dynamic at play, and people are observing it on some level and interpreting it through their own minds, and these are their theories. I think the telepathy part of alien encounters, which people talk about all the time, opens up a whole Pandora's box of possible non-physical interactions that are definitely worth considering, but I do not have a conclusion of my own when it comes to all of this. I do, however, feel that it's highly likely that there are all kinds of non-physical entities interacting with humans, and that some are helpful and others seem to be antagonistic. And I'll just pause here to say that, like, it is a little bit woo, but a lot of people do believe in the power of prayer or positive intention or using your mind to basically assert your will, and you can apparently protect yourself from these negative entities with a strong will. And they recommend, well, people, I'll just say there are many people who recommend, you know, working with your own energy to create like an energetic immune system that is strong and healthy. And this is something that has to be done methodically over time. Many spiritual and religious texts and theories also suggest these types of practices, and it can't hurt, right? At the end of the day, the whole spectrum of experience leads to learning and growth. So I'm not one to wish that everything was pure love and light all the time, because I personally value the really hard things I've been through. So I'm just kind of coming back to like Tom Campbell's view. It's all for learning. It's all for our growth. So it's like, even when we start to dig into this stuff and it feels scary and we want to get caught up on like, oh my God, how can I go on if I know that there's these demons and entities that want to suck my energy and all this stuff? Like, I would suggest like, don't spin out on that, because even if you're having an experience that feels real to you, there's always a way to bring your own willpower into the situation and make a change. And also, reducing the use of certain substances can be a really powerful tool when it comes to these things as well. And this is something that Eve Lorgen has recommended to many of her patients with anomalous trauma who get caught up in these really strange and paranormal events. She uses that term, anomalous trauma, to define several types of traumatic experiences, which can include near-death experiences, paranormal and UFO-related abduction events, cults, mind control, and narcissistic abuse. In particular, people who have experienced paranormally influenced, emotionally draining love relationships. That's what the love bite is all about. And you might be thinking, love is crazy, and it's been crazy for all of us, and how can you tell if you're in a love bite situation? But the distinction here is the paranormal influence, and she goes into great detail in her book around what that really includes. So there are two categories that she talks about when it comes to these interference patterns. The alien love bite is the version where a couple is being drawn together and interfered with by ETs specifically. It usually is accompanied by UFO sightings and other abduction type experiences. And The Dark Side of Cupid, which is her other book, is more about energy vampirism and non-physical entities in interfering with love for whatever reason. And she talks a lot about mythology and sort of the kind of like Greek myths around things like this. And it's kind of interesting just to read about all of that because mythology is fascinating. She points out that the emotional and psychic damage for people who have gone through these things is extreme and leaves them feeling completely heartbroken, isolated, and lost. These types of experiencers are frequently disbelieved and even made fun of. Eve says, "It has been my observation as an experiencer of alien intrusions and as a researcher in the fields of alien abduction and anomalous trauma that ostracism and criticism are inevitable consequences of telling the truth about one's experiences. This happens in mainstream circles as well as the truth-seeking community. There is peer pressure in the New Age community to perceive alien visitations in a certain way. The popular flavor of the week, channeled entities, ego swelling, starseed specialness, high drama, and prophetic predictions tends to get media attention. Left out are usually those individuals who refuse to cater to peer pressure to promote certain New Age agendas." So she's basically just saying it's like already so hard to talk about these weird things, but when you're talking about the really dark side of it, it's even harder because there is kind of a religious energy or mindset that has emerged among certain experiencers. And especially for those who see things as totally positive, they really don't want to hear the other side of it. And it's a good point, you know. Later on in the book, she talks about Bud Hopkins's book Witnessed, where he touches on the human-to-human bonding exercises orchestrated by the aliens, but this is not the focus of his book, and he does not suggest answers. In The Threat, David Jacobs suggests various modes of alien control and the hybrid breeding program. He sparsely speculates on what else the aliens might be planning or inspires us with any useful recourse. So she's kind of saying that there's like a gap in all of this, and it's a gap that she's trying to fill with her work. And then one more quote from Lorgen. "It sometimes bothers me to think I am alone in using non-hypnotic methods and crisis counseling techniques to help these emotionally exploited people. But I am committed to deeper exploration of what I see as the real alien or the real agenda behind the alien presence." So this perspective is interesting to me because I do think we need to look at all the different kinds of things people are experiencing in a balanced way and not get too attached to our own desired outcomes, whether that's hoping that this is all positive or becoming obsessed or convinced that it's all evil. You know, there's a lot going on and people are saying all kinds of different things. So right now, I'm just sitting in the middle, kind of waiting for more information. We humans are complex ourselves and have a whole spectrum of agendas among us, and perhaps whoever is behind the UFO phenomena is as complex, if not more, especially more if they're more advanced. And I want to say here, a lot of people make this argument that, like, it's kind of something I've heard Stephen Greer say. These aliens are so advanced that they're all also emotionally and spiritually advanced, and that's the only way you can get to that level of reality and all this stuff. But I just think about humans and human history and how different factions of humans have progressed technologically in ways that I don't really consider more advanced than other groups of humans who are perhaps more in touch with the earth and each other. So I don't think it's really wise to associate advancements in technology with advancements in consciousness. And look at us right now with all the developments around AI. Who knows where that's going to lead? I mean, it could be good and it could be devastating, and we don't know yet, but we're just barreling ahead. So, all that is to say that these aliens or these visitors could be very technologically advanced, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they have positive intentions, in my opinion. Some people have estimated over 70 races or types of aliens are here visiting Earth, and who knows how many of them are working together or working with humans, because there are a lot of stories about that as well. On the remote viewing and out of body side of all this, it is common to access information from non physical entities, and this includes what some consider to be angels and demons. In the show Encounters that I mentioned earlier, some of the people in Japan were talking about the orbs as souls, and there are others, including Christians, who have similar takes on what some would consider UFOs. We'll look at all of those more. We'll look at those things more moving forward. I think Chris Blesdo and UFO of God is a book that has come up before, and he has a really spiritual view of all of it, and he's an interesting character because the government and many intelligence agencies have also become interested in him. So we'll dig into that. All of these different ideas around psychic draining have something in common, and that's the ability for beings who are non-physical to interact with humans through telepathy and energetic manipulation. So back to Tom Campbell again, he would say, we're all consciousness. It doesn't matter if you're human, non-human, creature, non-physical, or alien. He doesn't really talk about aliens a lot, but consciousness is consciousness, and we all have the ability to communicate through consciousness. So that means that these other beings could have telepathic communications with us, and I think it's highly likely that they do based on all the reports. When I think about telepathic communication and things like MK Ultra experiments, for example, I can imagine there are people, humans, or other entities, physical or non-physical, who are interested in finding the pathways into a given psyche in order to gain remote control. So think about this. We've talked about theories where there's hybridization in order for other kinds of beings to get bodies that are compatible with the earth. Maybe there's a program where they just hijack the bodies that are already here. And it's weird to talk about because it sounds a lot like possession, but that's exactly what I'm saying. Like, consciousness potentially could cohabitate with a consciousness in a body or hijack the body under certain circumstances. So it seems possible to me. If mentally overpowering someone wasn't working, another tactic could be psychological manipulation. And just like in advertising, if you can make someone feel bad enough, you have an in. It's like poking a little hole in the barrier. And when someone feels bad about themselves, they can be convinced to want things or to buy things or to do things. So that's where the negative emotional aspect of it ties in for me when I think about all of this. When you can access a person's deep desires, you know how to lead them down certain pathways. You know where their allegiance is. If you can convince them that you are that source of love, they might follow you anywhere. So this goes back into the sort of trickery aspect of all of this. It's like a consciousness, non-physical or other, could remotely access a human consciousness that is existing within a body and start to infiltrate the system. Whether you're getting some kind of download, having long-distance remote conversations, channeling, angels, aliens, or anything else, when it comes to mental communication, think of the spaces in your mind like the old chat rooms back in the day. You might get a message from someone. They have a screen name that tells you who they are, but they could literally be anyone. So telepathically, it's only through long-term communication with that source that you can begin to determine the quality of the interaction and whether or not it is beneficial or suspicious. This is something that Tom Campbell talks about a lot when it comes to out-of-body work and remote viewing, and I think it's very important, especially if anyone thinks they are communicating with aliens or anyone else remotely. And of course, we can't talk about this without touching on schizophrenia and hearing voices in general. And in the spiritual communities and New Age communities, you might hear a lot about channeling and people trying to work on their telepathic abilities and things like that. And you'll hear people who say that, oh, there's no such thing as schizophrenia because, that's just how our culture labels it. And really, it's just people accessing other voices from beyond. I think it's all true. I think there are real mental diseases that could be labeled as schizophrenia, and I think that there are real conversations that can happen with non-physical entities within a human mind. And I also believe that you can kind of pick up on all kinds of data that could be interpreted in a audio way in your mind. So voices is a whole big topic, but for those who are having telepathic conversations or anything along the lines of channeling, just keep an eye on the quality of the communication, the nature of the conversations, etc., and don't get too hung up on who it's coming from, because you may never know. Tom Campbell would say you definitely can't ever know, and there's always the possibility that it's your own imagination. No matter what, if it's good content, whether it's from your own imagination or something outside of you, if it's helpful and contributes to your growth, that could be viewed as positive. And if it's taking you down a winding path or pumping you for information, it could be something else. So thinking about these things is just one way of approaching psychic defense. It's a way to use your discernment to make sure that you don't get pulled out to sea by your own mind or anyone else's. Okay? So it's applicable to dealing with your own anxiety or your own mental nagging or negative voices, and it's applicable to having telepathic conversations with entities that are separate from yourself. And I'm so sorry for all the tangents today, but this episode is covering some complex topics that do require some little side quests. So the love bite focuses on human relationships where abductees are sometimes implanted or tagged. A relationship is somehow arranged or influenced. There is often a clinically obsessive quality to the connection, and the connection usually ends in disaster. It can often end in one partner abruptly switching off, and associated with these love bites, there are often dreams of the other before meeting. So precognitive dreams, experiences of astral sex, heightened senses, like extremely heightened senses, and the feeling of being connected all the time, for better or worse. So you feel each other all the time. There seems to be a chaotic element that causes a lot of energy drain. There's a lot of drama and misery, and there can be a pattern of more than one of these types of relationships with certain experiencers, unfortunately. In the love bite, Lorgen lists the following symptoms of multiple abductees: UFO sightings, missing time, visions of animals with large black eyes, balls of light, visitation by non-human beings, hooded or robed beings in their room, paralysis during encounter, frequent dreams of aliens, unexplained nosebleeds, frequent sinus problems, inexplicable needle and puncture marks, inexplicable bruises, scars, scoop marks, mysterious pregnancies, luminescent marks on body, memories of alien medical procedures, unusual phobias of driving alone at night, sudden onset of sleep disorders, mysterious health, gynecological and sexual problems, unprecedented psychic ability, sudden onset of untraceable noises, and ear buzzing tones. And then in terms of the abduction-related traits for love bite experiencers, specifically, these are her top 15. They often have ties to intelligence communities or military, anomalous objects or implants in the body, clairvoyance or ESP, remote viewing of targeted partner, empathetic connection with partner. So again, feeling what the other is feeling to an extreme degree. Clinical degree of obsession in one partner, the abrupt switching off from the targeted partner, and mutually shared dreams, reptilian aliens in abduction experiences, greys, insectoids, or humanoid aliens, human, military, and or lab coat people, and mating attempts by aliens. So yeah, again, all of this is coming from people's reported experiences. I know it sounds pretty wild. Whether this is a consciousness phenomena, a mental disorder, something physical and real, something else altogether, or somehow all of the above, it is affecting some people, and counselors and researchers are trying to help as well as gain a deeper understanding. So if this doesn't apply to you, I'd say don't worry about it. If it stirs up fear, just remember we are here together, learning all the time, and life is full of trauma, but we're making it through somehow. So we got to keep our chins up and find the beauty and love in this life. And Tom Campbell likes to say that the antidote to fear is courage and love, and I really like that. I feel strangely optimistic despite all of life's horrors, and I definitely believe that developing courage is worthwhile. And I'm very interested in all things paranormal and UFO and alien related, and I will say that I freak myself out all the time when I'm doing this research, and I just try to breathe and recenter and focus on what's in front of me and remember that, like, sometimes we're going to dig up stuff that we don't really want to know, but if it's true, I want to know it. So I'm working on that courage side, and I hope this is interesting to you, and I hope that it's useful and that it finds the people who it is relevant to. So next time I'm probably going to have to focus on a positive theory just to bring a little balance, because this one and the one before were both a little bit dark. But for today, thank you for listening, and thank you for making it to the end with me. And as always, the links are below. If you liked this content, please like the video, and if you want to get more, subscribe. You could do the little bell notification if you want to know when I post. And if you know of anyone who you feel this could be important to, or that they could benefit from this information, or just find it interesting, please share. And I will see you next time on Shocks Talks. Happy spooky season!